Good evening. Please close your eyes. I'd like you to reflect on the images that pop into your mind when I say the words human trafficking. Don't overthink it. I'd like you to remember just those first images. Okay, you can open them now. If the images that you flashed on were those of pretty young girls, maybe locked in a basement or chained to a bed, dark figures holding them hostage, maybe a van transporting them from place to place, you'll be in the majority. Those are the stories and the images stoked by Hollywood, social media, and Law and Order SVU. But I can pretty much guarantee that nobody flashed on an adult male construction worker or an adult female cleaning a hotel room with the Rocky Mountains shining boldly in the background. On any given day in 2023, 24 million people are being trafficked for labor or sex worldwide. 6 million of them, roughly the population of the state of Colorado, are being trafficked for sex. And 3 times that many, roughly 18 million, are being trafficked for labor. Yet we rarely hear about it. Maybe more concerning, we almost never recognize it, even when it's right in front of us. I was 26, just out of graduate school when I first learned about human trafficking. I was working on the outskirts of a conflict zone in northern Uganda with child soldiers. Learning about the stories and the pain and the suffering, the violence, it was overwhelming. Learning about children being exploited hurts. I knew I wanted to be part of the solution, but I wasn't sure how to make real, lasting, and sustainable change. Since moving back to the US, I've dedicated my professional life to working in vulnerable and marginalized communities on labor rights and anti-exploitation efforts. Perhaps, like many of you, I used to think of human trafficking as a faraway issue, one perpetrated by criminal syndicates moving people across borders or scary dudes in a white van kidnapping people out of Target parking lots. What I've learned is that the social and systemic inequalities that underpin human trafficking are just as prevalent in the United States as anywhere else, and that trafficking happens everywhere, including in high-income Colorado communities, where inequality and demand are high, and awareness of this issue remains persistently low. The enormity and the complexity of this issue make it a tough topic for us to wrap our brains around. People get caught up in the idea that it's too big or too scary or too far away or maybe just not our problem. So the legal definition of human trafficking is a severe form of exploitation for labor, including sex work as a form of labor, through force, fraud, or coercion. So a human is forcing another human to work against their will through physical or violent force, fraudulent promises, or coercive threats for their own profit. Profit is the key word. Trafficking is an economic crime. It's hard for us to think of it that way because it's also so violent, but at its core, trafficking is about profit. We often think that if we arrest the perpetrators and rescue the victims that we'll solve this issue. But that logic is flawed. While law enforcement certainly has a role to play, we cannot arrest away an issue so inherently tied to what and who we value or don't value, what and who we find worthy of our resources and our time, and how we spend our own hard-earned money. Trafficking isn't a criminal justice issue, it is a human rights issue. And no matter where you live in the world, it is at your doorstep. So I'm going to tell you some stories now. These are true stories of severe exploitation for labor or sex that occurred here in the state of Colorado, told to us through the Colorado Human Trafficking Hotline. They're hard stories to hear. They're also hard to tell. Earlier this year in 2023, a group of Nicaraguan men were smuggled across the border by a man that they paid to guide them. Once they arrived in the US, their smuggler began to extort them for more money, telling them that if they didn't pay, they would kill their families. When they couldn't pay because they didn't have any money, They were brought to Colorado where their debt was sold to a local labor recruiter. While working construction for this man, paying off an extorted debt, they were threatened by threats of deportation and violence against their family members and themselves to build condos at a local ski resort with no pay and under torturous conditions. They were working 18 to 20-hour days with very little food or water, and they were forced to sleep outside on the construction site in January with temperatures dipping well below zero. No training, no safety equipment. They were too scared to talk to law enforcement, but when they did find an advocate to help support them, they were quickly moved by their trafficker to the next construction site. Same conditions, no advocate. They are presumably still in conditions of debt bondage. This is human trafficking. A few years ago, a 13-year-old girl named Kaya met a 35-year-old man online. She was a pretty typical teenager. She was from a Midwest city. She lived with her single mom. Mom worked 2 jobs to make ends meet. She wasn't home a lot, and they fought a lot. After a few weeks of messaging with this man, she decided to meet him in person at a local fast food restaurant. She was quickly charmed. He was good looking, and he showered her with compliments and with gifts, things that she couldn't possibly afford. He told her how mature she seemed for her age. She thought she was in love. After a couple of months of this kind of behavior, he eventually asked her to run away with him. The plan was that they would drive to California in his car, and when they got there, they would get married and start a new life. She was in. The day before they were supposed to leave, he asked her if she had any friends that she might want to take along. He had a friend who needed a girlfriend, and she was able to convince another 13-year-old girl to come along with them. The girl was already jealous of Kaya and her new boyfriend, so it didn't take a whole lot of convincing, and they were gone. After just a couple of days and a few hundred miles, the traffickers pulled over on the highway, told the girls that they were almost out of money. They explained to them that they were a family now and that everyone was going to have to contribute. And they reminded the girls of how much they'd already done for them. By the next day, they'd created online profiles for the girls and began selling them for sex. They were stopping on the highway at hotels, motels, and Airbnbs, sometimes just for a night, sometimes for multiple nights, depending on the demand. They arrived in Colorado at the peak of ski season, tens of thousands of wealthy tourists to feed the demand. Demand was high. These 2 13-year-old girls were sold countless times while they were trapped inside an Airbnb for 3 weeks, kept high in order to stay compliant. This is human trafficking. In Colorado's wealthiest county, in a beautiful home, there was a dark secret. There lived a wealthy foreign national family. They owned multiple homes around the world. It was mom, dad, and 2 school-age kids. They kept a nanny close by at all times. She was from the same country as the homeowners. She was actually a distant cousin, but she didn't speak English. To outsiders, everything seemed to be in order. They would sometimes see her accompanying the mother to the grocery store or on other errands. People would occasionally see her playing with the kids in the yard. What they didn't know was that she was suffering. She'd been recruited into this job by a local labor recruiter. Her family had encouraged her to take the job. After all, they were family. She was young, and she'd been promised an opportunity to attend community college. This was her shot. When she arrived, her passport was quickly confiscated for safekeeping. She was told that she wasn't allowed to leave the house without permission, and she was beaten when she tried. She was working 15 to 18-hour days, not only caring for the children as she had agreed to, but also cooking, cleaning, and really keeping the house in order. She was sleeping on blankets in the basement, no furniture, and the father was regularly visiting the basement to sexually assault her. It took her 9 years to summon the courage to leave. 9 years. This is human trafficking. Okay, so this is heavy, right? I can feel it. So let's do this together, right? We're all going to take a deep breath together. Ready? Ready? I get it. Hearing these stories is devastating and overwhelming, and you're probably wondering how you fit into such a complex puzzle. So now I want to give you some tools, some actions that you can take so that we can do better. Because I do believe that we can do better. Once we are armed with the truth about how this shows up, who is most affected, and importantly, how we can work together as communities to not only prevent this from happening, but also to support survivors to come forward and report it when it does. But before I do that, I want to shout out the This Is Human Trafficking campaign that was created and distributed by the Colorado Governor's Human Trafficking Council. It is amazing. Won an Emmy, as a matter of fact, this amazing public awareness campaign, and you can learn more about it by going to thisishumantrafficking.com. Okay, so back to these actions. First, push back on false and often harmful narratives. Know the truth and bring people into this fight with the truth. We don't need sensationalized imagery. The truth is enough. Push back on social media or even around your own dinner table against invented narratives of innocent young female victims or scary male kidnapping perpetrators. According to our data, less than 3% of trafficking involves kidnapping. Traffickers overwhelmingly know their victims, know their vulnerabilities, and how to exploit them. They are family members, like the case of the domestic servant, or employers, like on the construction site, or intimate partners, like Kaya's boyfriend, or other people in positions of power. On average, 25% of traffickers are female. Trafficking is hidden in plain sight. Second, stop othering and don't look away. Trafficking is not something that happens over there or only to certain types of people, and the traffickers are almost never who we think they are. What and who we value and who we consider worthy of our time and our resources can have a huge effect on trafficking locally. By putting this problem into a more local context, we can better understand who the vulnerable people are in our community who may be being exploited, and will better understand how to help them. I'd like you to take a moment and reflect on the vulnerable people in your own communities. People don't stay in trafficking situations because they're locked in a basement. They stay because they don't know who or how to ask for help, don't think that they'll be believed, or simply have nowhere else to go. Third, we all want stuff and we want it cheap. The allure of cheap labor and goods is a force driving our consumer choices. However, often in our quest for affordability and convenience, we overlook the consequences of our buying habits. The reality is that the demand for cheap labor and goods is a force driving human trafficking globally and locally, especially in industries where cost-cutting measures have taken priority over basic human rights. From agriculture to construction, to hospitality and domestic service, employers capitalize on a workforce lacking legal protections and often composed of migrants seeking a chance at survival. Workers suffer deplorable conditions, substandard wages, and limited rights. I urge you to be more conscious consumers and think deeply about where your food and manufactured goods come from. Fourth, call the Colorado Human Trafficking Hotline. This hotline is managed by the Laboratory to Combat Human Trafficking, but supported by over 300 organizations across the state who support survivors of human trafficking of all forms, to all genders and all ages. Report a tip to our trusted and trained law enforcement partners, or if you're not interested in a criminal justice response, call for resources for a friend, a community member, or a family member in need. If you see something, say something. Okay, we've covered a lot of ground. I hope that I've given you some clarity on what human trafficking looks like in our Colorado communities, and I really hope that you're thinking deeply about the vulnerable people in your own community. I want you to hold on to that. Turn towards this issue and not away from it. Affecting change locally will have ripple effects globally. There's more that I could add here, but instead I think I'll let the great poet and author Maya Angelou close us out. She said, "I did then what I knew how to do. Now that I know better, I do better. Thank you.